Hi, everyone. This is Timothy Gager, and welcome to Virtual Fridays Dire Literary Series. And our feature tonight is Keetje Kuipers, and she's just a wonderful, wonderful poet, and she is going to read for you and for us. And if you're watching on Facebook, welcome. And let me do a little of the bio action. And like this is just her bio is just an amazing running list. So basically, let me summarize. She's got 3 books of poems, and she's won tons and tons of literary awards, listed in Poets and Writers Best Books of the Year, Best New Books. Um, it's just wonderful. I saw her read in Dorchester a little over a year ago when we were allowed to go outside, and I purchased the book, her last book, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful read. So, without any other words from my mouth, let me turn it over to Keetje Kuipers.
Hey everybody. This is this is kind of fun. I did a lot of Zoom readings during the first part of the pandemic and now it's kind of been a while. So it's nice to get to do one of these again. Um, it's nice too. The days are starting to get longer out here in Montana, and so I don't have to do this in the total darkness. Get a little natural light going, better for the Zoom look. Um, so I'm going to read a couple of poems from my most recent book, All Its Charms, and then I'm going to read some new stuff because that's really fun. Makes me feel scared, and I think that feeling scared when you share your work is a good way to feel. So I'm going to start with some from the book. And this book, I wrote it when I was trying to get pregnant for the first time, and that's when I started writing these poems. And then I wrote these poems when I was pregnant, and then when I had my daughter, who is now 8 years old. But there are a lot of babies in this book. But I really resist the idea that this book is about having babies or being a mom or kids or anything like that. I feel like all my books have had, a lot of, I hesitate to call them props, but they've had a lot of like stage setting, in them. I have a theater background, and so I think a lot about like what's in the scene, um, and and that's not really what the poems are about, right? Like that's where the poem takes place, or those are the pieces that make it possible for me to write this poem. But the poem is really about transcendence or loss, or whatever it might be, right? So these poems, I think, are about transformation and becoming a new person, right? Which I think when I was younger, I thought like I'd get to some place and then I'd be who I was going to be for the rest of my life. And of course, now that I'm older, I realize that that's wonderfully not the way it works, and that actually I get to become a different person for my entire life. And it's exciting, right? Like, who will I be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? It's a constant transformation, a constant evolution. So that's what I think these poems are about. But you'll see some babies show up to make it possible for me to talk about that. Hmm. Getting the baby to sleep. Sometimes the baby can't reconcile the self with the self. Too hungry to eat, too tired to sleep. I know the feeling. Oh, America, on those nights when you are too beautiful for me to continue to forgive you any longer, for allowing us to kill each other with your graceless bullets, or exile our neighbors across the fences of your fictitious border, or argue over the ownership of each young girl's body as if its freedom is a lie she must stop telling herself. Then, America, I go out into your radiant arms. The baby and I drive through your streets, over the bridge and its light chipped waters. under a moon so big, so full of itself that though I know it belongs to the world, it can't be anything but American. I hang my arm out the window and skim the air like touching skin. I breathe you in, and the baby sleeps. So I know that a lot of us have been far away from our families this year. I live in the West, I live in Montana, and at the moment, actually, I live with my parents. We have moved in with them, and I will tell you more about that later. But usually we do a little trip out to Michigan every year because we were talking about my name before we got started, and my name is Dutch and I am Dutch, and my family is all from a small town in Michigan called Holland, Michigan, where everybody once was Dutch. And now it's become a slightly more interesting place than I think it must have been then. But we go back, and that's where all of my cousins and my aunts and uncles and my grandparents before they passed away, and really everybody. My parents were really the only people who got out of that little town and saw the world. And but we go back every summer to see family, and on Lake Michigan. The Great Lakes. My wife, the one I thought I'd never have. Because does any of us believe we deserve to be happy in this life? Lets my daughter paint her toenails a sloppy silver as my aunt smokes a second cigarette and pages through photos on her phone so I can see how the car looked after my cousin wrecked it last month in a past midnight field near the poultry processing plant, just a half mile from grandma's unsold house, high on meth or heroin, or maybe not high at all, but fighting her hunger. While I pick through this dead girl's jewelry, just as starved for something to hold on to as those feckless gulls pecking the sand a few feet away. The sun is shining brighter than the gold-plated necklace I fasten around my neck and swear to wear forever. And even though scientists are finding nicotine in the water and oxy in the mussels, my cousin's kids are down there at the edge of the beach screaming their heads off with the pure joy of plunging below the surface. It's hard not to feel good watching the waves. But my aunt needs me to believe in the glass and the blood and her daughter's body, a thing unidentifiable, a thing none of us had really seen in years. She needs me to understand that her pain is water as far as the eye can see. Maybe I'll read some new poems now, and then maybe read one more from the book at the end. I think I was talking, so I'm teaching at the University of Montana right now, and I was talking to my graduate students the other day about putting together a first book manuscript and how do you decide the order of the poems and what poems go in and which poems don't make the cut. And I was saying that, you know, with my 3 books, I think with each subsequent book, I've realized that there were some poems that got published in one book, and really those poems, it turns out, were the start of another book, and I just didn't know it yet because I didn't know where I was going exactly. And I think with this book, you know, so many of the poems on the surface are poems of motherhood, right? And as I said, they're ways to write about other things. They're entrance points, right? Motherhood opens a door to talk about the world. But I started writing some poems about my wife. My wife sort of would appear in poems. And And now I'm writing a lot of poems where my wife shows up. She's the main prop in these poems. And she makes fun of me a lot about these because she's asleep in a lot of them. It's just, I'm like, I wrote another poem about you. And she's like, it's not about me. I'm just sleeping in this poem that you wrote. And it's because I'm writing late at night because it's the only time I have to work on my poems. So it's like my wife's asleep in this poem. But this is sort of one of the newer wife poems, and she's awake in this one, very awake. The rats. They come home with our daughter because there's no one at school to feed them on the weekends. They are mates, and like all true companions, they are devoted and they bite. We set their cage on the kitchen table and wait for the weekend to end, for our girl to fall asleep so we can talk about God, while the rats lick the silver ball that delivers the water one drop at a time. There are so many points on which you and I disagree. The value of a clean counter, the purpose of parent-teacher conferences, what warrants a good cry, or calling you a name so cruel I make myself whisper it through my teeth. God is the least of it. When I think I'm so angry I could hit you in the face, you turn yours to me with a look of disbelief. The rats, meanwhile, have turned up the volume. Tick, tick, says the silver ball as their teeth click against it, thirsty as ever, thirstier still at night when the darkness wakes them. And during the day, when they're curled together in their flannel hammock, head to tail, two furry apostrophes possessing nothing but each other, paws pressed together as if in prayer, to what gods do they prostrate themselves then? God of fidelity? God of forgiveness? I lied when I said I didn't believe. Who, even me, the coldest of heart, could turn away from a sea parted, bread that multiplies to answer need, water transformed to the sweetest wine, the kind that tastes better for each year it's been left in the barrel. So, my family is a really interesting little family. We did a lot of things out of order. I got pregnant before I married my wife. So I was a single mother by choice for a while. After we got married, we didn't move in together right away. And then when my daughter was 7, my wife got pregnant, and now we have a second child. And it was really interesting to be the other mom. That is a really, after 7 years, a unique experience to be in, and really interesting too to watch somebody else so intimately go through the experience of pregnancy. In the outdoor shower with my pregnant wife. The old Frisbee from Burger Chef, once red but faded now, the pale pink of my wife's widening areolas, lies upturned beneath the saltwater drip of our sagging beach towels. This world is full of objects succumbing to the gentle ebb of decay. But her body, loosening breasts and blue-veined thighs caught in a cascade of wet light as she turns beneath the showerhead's senseless spray, is not one of them. That low-blooming shudder and heft at her hips can't compare to her belly-button skin, stretched taut and thin, become the pale sail of a boat screaming into harbor. I am here to praise the way in which everything I have ever loved about her body is about to be ruined forever in the breaking open. Tonight, the wind will come up, turn the towels on the line into fat bells, churn the waves into a froth, drag the sand out and leave it where our toes can't touch. In the morning, the ocean will return to its languid sheet, but the beach will be strewn with the wreckage. I want already the body scarred by stretch marks, the extra flap of skin to hang soft at her waist, the feet that will never again be quite so small. I want to worship the body after the storm, the one I'm imagining already as she unfolds the straps from her shoulders and peels the suit off, her skin covered in those minute and glittering fragments of shell some people insist on calling sand. So, something that I had never really played with before in my writing is magical realism. That hadn't, I had I'd written many poems full of things that did not actually happen, because I believe that you have to sometimes stretch the truth and bend the autobiographical truth a little bit in your poems to take out unnecessary complications, to make the pieces fit together more easily for your reader, to change the point of view or perspective so that there's more intimacy. But magical realism was not something I had ever dipped into before. And all of a sudden, last year, I started to go there in my poems. And it was really amazing to realize that I could write these poems in which, you know, unbelievable, impossible things happened. And yet by writing the poems, it made them possible. So this is one of those. With Garbo in Palm Springs. We're at the resort, the one with the 41 pools, and it's night. So if we were up in the swaying fronds of a palm tree, the ground would stretch before us, a green, freckled thigh against a dark sheet. But Greta and I are inside, perched on the edge of the bed, watching my wife sleep. She's beautiful, we agree. And my daughter too, their blonde hair spread against the pillow like a silk scarf in a silent movie. Though now Greta's impatient with all the watching, the kid especially. So we go outside to smoke her cigarettes, to lean our backs against the white adobe walls and kiss for as long as it takes. The electronic lock clicks behind us, a set of perfect teeth. And I'm chasing Greta across the lawn with its lemon trees I can smell in the dark, past the lounge chair where someone's abandoned the sort of wide-brimmed hat meant to keep us young, over the patio, still warm as skin from the sun's relentless shining, toward the place where she's already slipped off her dress and climbed into the water, side-stroking with one arm and holding her smoke aloft with the other. And if I say it's a dream, it will have no power. And if I say it's real, no one will ever believe me. But can't it be both? I want to rub my body against her perfect one. So I do, all my nubbly parts sanded down against the smooth monument of her form, ageless as the desert once was before we came here and turned it into a golf course. Now only my hunger, its vast, unquenchable fury, interrupts the glow of each long leg as she traces egg-beater circles in the blue depths beneath her. I'm just going to read two more poems. One more new one. This one's really really new. So as I mentioned before, we are living with my parents in their house in Montana. In the midst of the pandemic, I was offered a one-year teaching position at the University of Montana as a visiting professor. And so we jumped at that opportunity, and my parents happen to live in Missoula, so we are here for the year. And it's been a really interesting experience to live in a multi-generational household, 3 generations under one roof. And it was something I'd sort of always dreamed of. And a lot of the best parts of it that I imagined have been true. And then there have been lots of other surprises as well. So this poem is called Multi-Generational Household. In the middle of the night, I come downstairs for a glass of water and find my father in the kitchen, high as a kite, the dregs from his vape pen making a murky cloud around his head as he stuffs his mouth with fistfuls of nuts from a plastic sack of trail mix. Tomorrow, he'll turn over a year of his life that men never used to dream of seeing. Tomorrow, he won't remember a thing. But right now, he's lying on the couch, moaning with the pleasure of still being so alive. His frayed blue robe falling open to reveal a pair of pajamas I know from my girlhood of riding his back across the living room carpet while he growled like a bear. Now his sock-mittened feet twitch in ecstasy as he tells me about the color of tonight's moon. Bitter orange, he says, the sky like a pot of dark chocolate, hanging just outside the window. Everyone in the house is busy making their own sleeping sounds. The baby like the faint wash of surf. My wife hopelessly snoring away. My mother's CPAP machine filling in the gaps with mechanized white noise while my daughter rolls over to kick her in the ribs. Except this man, who's about to crack open a carton of ice cream, who's decided he'll sleep when he's dead. Father, I might be paying witness to the revelry of your final days. A bacchanalia so confident it makes me want to pour this glass of water over your head instead of down my throat, to wake you from the joyful stupor of your own denied demise, to shock you alive forever with the impossible knowledge of your end. So I'm going to end with one more poem from the book. This is my daughter's favorite poem. She doesn't understand what it's about, but she knows that she's in it, and she likes that about it. Told you so. When my daughter spills her orange juice, I wipe it off the linoleum with the old plaid boxers of the man I thought I'd marry. Elastic ripped out, seams unraveling. I've had lives already. At night, they crawl across my skin before I can turn on the light. We spend all these years wanting, and then one day, sudden as a lamp set to a timer, we have. There were the nights I drank just so I could feel a little more of my own unhappiness. Now, with my feet pressed into this rug, I'll never be that drunk again. Before I went to the clinic to get pregnant, I cried onto the shoulder of an old flame, worried that whoever I loved next would never know my body when it was beautiful. How could I have been wrong about so many things? Thank you.
Wow, that was a wonderful, wonderful set. And I don't know, I guess it leads into my first question. Do you ever hear someone else's wonderful set and never want to write again yourself?
Yeah, all the time. When this book first came out in the spring of 2019, I did a bunch of traveling for the book all over the country, but part of that was a little mini tour in the Pacific Northwest with two of my friends, the poets Erica Meitner and Jeffrey Davis. And they're fabulous poets and fabulous readers. And I got to hear them read the same poems from their new books, every night for 5 nights in a row. And it was really, it was wonderful because we got to sort of rehearse our new books together and give each other feedback, but also it was really stunning and amazing to be able to not just hear those poems one time, but to absorb them again and again, night after night, and appreciate them in new ways. And I think, yeah, they blow my mind.
That's a great question in the chat, but I'm going to piggyback into another question I was about to ask. So your daughter loves that poem because she's in it. What about your wife? Does your wife ever have poems that she doesn't want put out there? And what do you do about that?
Yeah, I think my wife is an incredibly understanding person in general, which is why I married her. But and I think she understands too that it's art, and that even if I'm writing a poem where everything is true, the emotions behind that might be heightened. And what it is it's a distillation, right? Like a poem is something that you've taken and you boiled down to its essence. So it's the taste is particularly strong, and she understands that. So she can read poems in which she appears or our family appears, and she can understand that this is like the most intense expression of some truth in our lives. And she's cool enough to handle that, which I'm really grateful for. um i think I think that it is actually, I've never been worried about, what will my family think about my work, except for the poem that I read tonight about the Great Lakes poem. I was very concerned about what my aunt, the mother of my cousin, how she would feel about that poem. And recently, as I write about my parents aging, which has become something else, to be in such close proximity with them at this point in their life where they're undergoing another transformational experience in their lives. I think that too, I'm suddenly more aware as I'm writing, how the people who are more than characters in my work, who are real people, how will this affect them? And I think because it's the first time I've really had to think about it, I haven't figured it out yet. I remember talking to Sharon Olds about this, years and years ago, and she said, that she had, and I don't know, I've since thought, like, really, was she telling me the truth or was she kidding? But she said she'd published poems under a pseudonym, and it had never occurred to me that somebody at her level would do it. But I guess that's always a possibility. Or I have another friend who's writing poems that are really racy, and she doesn't want her family to see, and so she only publishes them in print journals. She doesn't publish them in any magazines that have online publications. So I definitely have a few poems earmarked now for print only, but I don't know what happens when you get to that book point.
What
And they,
about taking it the other tact and you write the poem because it's an honest poem. Did you ever feel like you've had to go to someone and like get permission to put it out there?
yeah, I think with my aunt, I felt that way. I needed to know that she would be okay with that poem, and that she would read that poem and hear that poem in the way that I meant it, which is a poem about um, you know, without judgment of anyone in our family, and instead a poem sort of honoring the incredible difficulty of her loss. And luckily she did read it that way.
You write a lot. You talked about themes and how your last book had to do with your daughter, and the next book is jumping off about your wife. Now, do you visualize or conceptualize a theme and then write a manuscript toward that theme, or is it just become the theme creates itself?
The theme creates itself. And I think that with my first book, I really didn't know what I was writing about. I was in graduate school when I started that book. And so I had to think a lot about it because I had to talk to my professors about what I thought my work was about. And I was applying for fellowships after graduate school. And I had to be able to put together some like really smart elevator pitch about my work so I could get grants and things. But I think I didn't really understand what I was writing, what my poems were about at that point. And then with my second book, I think at some point in the midst of that process, I sort of became aware, like, oh, look at what these pieces have in common. Look at what they're writing towards. And again, I don't mean like, babies or wives or things like that, but more like what is, oh, this book is about regret. This book is about blame. That's really what my second book is enters into. That's the contract with the reader. And I think I figured that out about halfway through the process, but that did not, that in one way it didn't help me because I don't write project books and I don't write towards themes. So it wasn't like, oh great, that's what this next book is about, now I'm going to write those poems. That doesn't work for me. If I think about it that way, then I'm really in trouble because then I'm writing just total crap poems. But it does help me revise because sometimes I write poems and I don't know what they're about. And it's like, well, this thing happened or somebody said something to me or I saw something or I have this image and I write some stuff down and I think there's a poem here, what's it about? And I don't know. And I go, oh, but I do know because I'm writing about regret. And oh, that's what's happening with this tree in this poem. And that's what's happening. That's why when I heard somebody say that sentence on a street and I wrote it down, it's because it connects to regret. And so then I can sort of revise towards those things, but I can't like draft towards a theme. Ugh.
So, I mean, you've lived in some pretty isolated places. You lived on an island in Washington State. You're in Montana now, and now we're, still in the pandemic and in an isolated state in a lot of ways. Has that seeped into your work at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that, I think a lot of times we think of writers as like these people alone in a room, the solitary existence, the isolation. We don't need a pandemic. We're poets, right? We're self-isolating all the time.
We don't leave the room until the book is done.
Right, right.
Slide some food under the door for me.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think, we're artists and we make art in order to connect, actually. Like we're seeking to go outside ourselves and not just to like send a message out into the universe, but like to get a message bounced back, right? Like we want to have an exchange. We want to have a dialogue. We want to have an authentic and genuine connection. And so I think that in some ways, maybe as writers, we're more equipped to go into a situation like the pandemic or a situation like where I was living in a cabin off the grid in the rogue wilderness area in Southern Oregon for 7 months by myself, 2 hours down a dirt road from the nearest other human. But maybe that wasn't as hard for me as it would have been for somebody else who doesn't write or who doesn't make art, because I didn't feel so alone. I had my books, and so I had my voices, I had my people, I had these others that I was in conversation with, and I had my writing, which allowed me to be in conversation with people, outside of that space too. I sort of didn't feel so alone. So I think maybe, yeah, maybe maybe we've got this extra power that helps us out in those isolating situations.
It's almost an irony what you said because, you have this isolation, but you're creating it in order to belong in society,
Yeah.
which I find really, really interesting. So when you were in Oregon, 2 hours off the grid for all those months, I also read up on you and you're working on a memoir about that. So how far along are you on that memoir?
Well, the memoir has kind of been sidetracked by a novel, but and also I was talking about this with someone recently. I really, it's so funny to think, like, to say that I struggle with nonfiction because I write these poems that are very autobiographical, and yet I feel like it's so hard for me to pick a single voice for a memoir and sustain it the whole way through and feel as though I'm telling the truth the whole time. And of course, with memoir, you are telling a truth, right? That's the whole conceit, is that it is a slice, a piece, a single lens, a single viewpoint, and there's a whole bunch more story outside that angle. But so you're just telling this angle of it. And I struggle with that. With poems, I can tell all these different stories, and I only have to tell one for one page. And then the next page, I get to tell a different version of that story, right? And I get to write it again and again and again in a different way. But with a memoir, I feel this sense of like I have to pick a path and stay on it. And part of what I'm struggling with in writing this memoir, I've written probably half of it, is that it's maybe not clear to me yet in my life what that experience meant for me in the long term. It was, other than having kids, it was probably, I mean, it definitely was the most profound experience of my life, and really, had an incredible impact on me. But I think it's an impact that is going to be a lifelong impact. I think that when you go into a situation like that, so few of us get to have that kind of isolation, especially in a natural environment like that. I mean, my closest friends were bears for those 7 months. I saw a lot of them, and gave them all names and got to know them really well. But I think when you have an experience like that, it's not, you don't come out of it, instantly transformed. Like, I'm talking a lot about transformation tonight, but I think transformation can also be this very slow, gradual thing that happens. I think that experience created in me a kind of self-knowledge about what I'm made of, and the bravery that I have, that I think hasn't fully played out in my life yet. So I think there's more story, even though that was 10 years ago. I think that there's another piece of the story that hasn't happened yet.
I also heard though that the Bears named you all 7 courses of a 7 course meal. Like, it's, so you you do talk a lot about transformation and transformation in life. Do you find that your poetry transforms along with you, or is your poetry more of a constant?
To me, at this point in my life, it feels like something actually that I'm returning to. It feels cyclical. It feels like my first book was in one place, my second book was in another, then my third book, and now the poems that I'm writing now, I feel like they're taking me full circle back to where I started. So I think it's it's a revolving thing rather than an evolving thing. Um, and it feels really good to come back to where I was with that first book. That first book has a lot of wildness in it. And I think that I'm sort of pulled in my writing in two different directions. I'm pulled towards, lots of freedom and long sentences and big image and sound and all of that. I like to go to those places. On the other hand, I'm super into formalism, and I love meter and syllabics and rhyme, and I'm constantly like grinding away at the tiniest things that maybe a reader doesn't see on the page or doesn't hear when I read the poem, but it creates a kind of music and a kind of momentum inside of and behind the poem that's really important to me. So I have those two really different things, like freedom, wildness, and then constraint of formal elements. And so what feels good is that I started in a very free place, I got much more constrained, and now I'm coming back to that place of wildness in my work with all this wonderful constraint in the background, right? And so that feels really good.
Now, does any of that technique or mindset work its way into a memoir? And I guess John asked, what about magical realism ending up in a memoir?
Maybe that's what my memoir needs, maybe that's the kind of imagining that has to happen for me to understand it. I think memoir is really a popular genre right now, and sometimes that can make it harder to write your own, right? You have other people's visions like, up there sort of looming over you. And I think a lot about Cheryl Strayed's book, Wild, and how, that's the story of a young woman who goes out into the woods by herself and has this transformational experience and figures something out about herself. And in many ways, that's something that there's lots of overlapping ground with my story, but in other ways, that's not my story at all. So I think figuring out what my story is maybe would take some magic. I like that idea a lot.
All right, Keetje, let me end here with which made you more excited, winning a Pushcart Prize or being included in Best American Poetry?
Um,
You're not going to hurt the feelings of either one of them. Just...
they were both really exciting and they happened right around the same time. And so I think that that is like the crazy roulette wheel of being an artist and putting your work out into the world. You can go years without getting any kind of recognition at all and feeling like you're just shouting into the void. And then all of a sudden, bam, bam, right in a row, a week apart, a day apart. I found out about my first book on a Thursday, and I found out about the Stegner Fellowship on a Friday on the next day. I mean, it was 24 hours later, right? And that was after years of not getting any recognition. And I was thinking, like, maybe I should go to nursing school. Like, what else, what other careers should I consider? And so, when I found out about the Pushcart and the Best American, that happened also really close together. And at a time in my life where I was like, I had a baby, I was a single mom, like I was just I had my first like academic job. I was just kind of grinding away. And so sometimes those things come along right when you need them. Best American gave me an excuse to go to New York, though, and that is one of my favorite former homes. So maybe that one wins.
And the two of those were two separate poems, correct?
Mhm.
All right. Now it's funny how we have blinders as writers, but out of those two, which of those poems was your favorite? Did you like better?
Um, I think so. Told You So is the last poem that I read tonight. Oh no, that wasn't that one. So okay. So there were two poems that were published in a small online magazine that is now it was a magazine that Ruben Quesada ran. That magazine no longer exists, and it was Told You So, and oh my gosh, I can't even remember the name of the other poem now. But the other poem is the one that was, oh, Migration Instinct. That's the one that's in the Pushcart Prize. And I was, Told You So is the one that I love. And that's the one that didn't end up in an anthology. But the other poem, the one in Best American, is We Drive Home from the Lake. And I didn't read that poem tonight, but that's a poem that I love. And that I've gotten a lot of mileage out of, and maybe that's why I love it. It was a poem that was first published at Gulf Coast, which was a magazine that I wanted to be in for a long, long time. And I found out that it was taken at Gulf Coast, and a month later, I got an email from the New Yorker saying that they wanted to publish it. And I had to tell them, I already told you guys that somebody else took that poem. That poem's not available anymore. Sorry, Paul Muldoon. And and but then eventually from Gulf Coast, it ended up in Best American Poetry. So I think maybe that's a poem that I really love because it makes me believe in myself as a poet. If nothing else, I wrote one really good poem.
Well, Keitra, thank you so much for being with us. That was a wonderful reading and wonderful Q&A. I would like to direct folks to, we talked about her book, and here it is. If my internet can move any, and here it is, in case you wanted to have a good look at it. And tell folks what your favorite indie bookstore is that they might want to order it from.
Oh, my favorite bookstore, indie bookstore right now is Fact and Fiction in Missoula, Montana. That is a lovely bookstore, and they have an online system that is very easy to use, and you can hop on there and get it from Mara, the owner. She's wonderful, community member, and yeah, it's a great little bookstore.
So write that down, folks, and give them some business because those stores are, they're struggling right now. So anyway, I'm going to say goodbye to our Facebook folks right now. Any of you guys want to get involved in the Q&A or the open mic, use the Zoom link the next time. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.